I want to just say a few words of introduction before I actually do this reading. And the first one is to remind us, as I've said a few times in the past, that in Hebrew, the word dream and vision are synonyms. A dream is a vision you have when you're sleeping, and a vision is a dream you're having when you're awake. So when you read the accounts in the Hebrew scriptures or in the New Testament of dreams or visions, they're exactly the same thing. So if I were to pick out the three most important dream visions in the entire New Testament, I would say the first one would be the vision Mary had of Gabriel, where she's invited to become the mother of the Messiah. I would say the second one were a series of dreams that Joseph, her betrothed, had, telling him to marry Mary, even though the child she was carrying wasn't his. And then he was told to flee into Egypt because Herod was trying to kill the child. And then later he was told in a dream to come back because Herod was dead. And in a final dream he was told, don't settle in Judea because Herod's son is in charge. Go up to Galilee, and he did. And maybe the third most important dream vision would be the one I'm going to read right now. It was a dream vision that Peter had, and it's from the Acts of the Apostles. And to understand this, we have to realize that at the time that Peter has this vision dream, the Jesus movement was just a sect, a tiny sect within Judaism. There were no non-Jews involved. And in fact, it was verboten for Jews to eat with or socialize with the Gentiles. And this dream vision changed everything. So from the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 10. About noon the following day, Peter went up on the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat. And while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw heaven opened and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its four corners. It contained all kinds of four-footed animals, as well as reptiles and birds. Then a voice told him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." "Surely not, Lord," Peter replied. "I have never eaten anything impure or unclean." The voice spoke to him a second time. "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean." This happened 3 times, and immediately the sheet was taken back up to heaven. While Peter was still thinking about the vision, the Spirit said to him, "Simon, 3 men are looking for you. So go downstairs. Do not hesitate to go with them, for I have sent them." Peter went down and said to the men, "I'm the one you're looking for. Why have you come?" The men replied, "We have come from Cornelius, the centurion. He is a righteous and God-fearing man who is respected by all the Jewish people. And a holy angel told him to ask you to come to his house so he could hear what you have to say." Later, as Peter entered Cornelius' house, Cornelius met him and fell at his feet in reverence. But Peter made him stand up. He said, "Stand up. I am only a man myself." While talking with him, Peter went inside and found a large gathering of people. He said to them, "You are well aware that it is against our law for a Jew to associate with or visit a Gentile. But God has shown me that I should not call anyone impure or unclean. So when I was sent for, I came without raising any objection." Words inspired by God. For the last 8 or 9 years of his life, my father suffered from senile dementia, and he died on November the 7th, 2009. And exactly 49 weeks later, on October the 17th, 2010, I had a really powerful dream of him. And in this dream, I'm walking along a beach, a very, very, very wide beach, and I'm about 100 yards from the edge of the water, walking parallel to the ocean. And all of a sudden, I see this horseman rider galloping furiously. They're much nearer the water than I am. And all of a sudden, I realize that the rider is my father, and think, holy God Almighty, should a demented man be riding a horse? And they're moving really, really, really fast. And it looks like my father is a real expert rider, which he wasn't, in waking consciousness. And as I'm watching, all of a sudden, he pulls sharply on the reins and he heads straight out into the ocean, galloping straight into the waves. And right then, this gigantic wave, almost like a tsunami, comes straight at them. And I think, oh my God Almighty, he's going to get totally pummeled and belted right down to the bottom. But I see him, he passed right through the wave. And somehow I was able to, in my dream state, I was able to accompany him. So I'm not just watching it from the shore anymore. I'm just behind him watching. He goes straight through the wave. And all of a sudden, he takes an orthogonal shift and points the horse downwards and dives deeply into the depths of the ocean. And I think all of a sudden, he's free at last. He has gone to Tír Fáthán, to Tír na nÓg. In our cosmology, in the Celtic cosmology, there's a special place. We have two names for it. One of them is called Tír Fáthán, which literally means the land under the waves. And the other name for it is Tír na nÓg, which means the land of the ever young. And for the Celts, in some senses, it's our version of Nirvana. And in fact, the name I give to my home up here, and if you've ever visited me, is Tír na nÓg. There's a sign up there saying Tír na nÓg. So I'm in my dream, I'm really, really happy. And then I get a message from him, and he says, I've finally made it all the way home. And I feel like as if these 49 weeks have been the period of healing and purgation and confusion is successfully ended, and that he's back home with God. So I want to today recap the last two homilies I've done on dreams, and we have a lot of information to carry, to work through. I'll try to telescope it as best I can, and then open it up to a Q&A. So I started off 2 weeks ago by just giving a few quick definitions. For instance, what we call our waking state. In the waking state, perception is via our sensorium. Thomas Aquinas said famously, nihil est in intellectu quod non ante affuerit in sensu. There is nothing in the intellect which is not first in the senses. So the senses are the ways in which we suck in data from the external world. And our waking consciousness, consists of manipulating those data that we suck in through our sensorium. But in the dreaming state, perception is without sensory input. Your dreams are not created by the sensory input while you're actually dreaming. And as I say, dreams are sleeping visions and visions are waking dreams. And then lucid dreaming is being aware while you're dreaming that you are dreaming. So there were just a few quick definitions. And then I went to talk about whence dreams, or who makes the dreams. And you could say in some senses that you're the dream maker yourself. So in some senses, your thought forms, and your shadow symbols or your sub-personalities are creating the location of the dream, the costumes the characters are wearing, the plot, the dialogue, and all of the characters that you're creating, all of those. And in fact, you're acting out all the parts, except that for purposes of enjoyment, you pretend that you're just the dream ego, but that you're actually playing all the parts. And you're creating the location and the costumes and the dialogue, and the plot. So in some senses, you're the dream maker. But there's a whole other dream maker involved in it as well. So these are forces from outside the dreamer. There are archetypal energies into which you're plugged. There are night travelers, people who themselves are dreaming and traveling astrally and intersecting with you in the dream state. They can be discombobulated entities, souls who are stuck in Earth orbit at the lower astral plane, and in some senses are contributing to fashioning your dreams. It could be a place where the deceased are visiting you, or it could be a place where helpers or guardians are intervening. So the dream maker can be many, many different, a composite of many, many different people. I talked a little bit about Carl Jung, and very, very briefly about his theory of dreaming. And for him, dreaming is a kind of a feedback system from the subconscious or the unconscious. Dreams are kind of the first heads up we get of an alternative perspective from our conscious wrestling with the problems of the day. And so Carl Jung said, if you listen to your dreams and work with your dreams, you can save yourself a whole lot of problems. If you don't listen to your dreams, what happens is you wake up with irrational moods. You have no reason why I'm in a foul mood, and it's because I didn't work with my dreams. And if I continue to ignore my irrational moods, he says, Carl Jung says, it will result finally in psychosomatic illnesses. You'll start getting illnesses which aren't of biological origin, but rather of psychological origin. And if you ignore even that, if you ignore the dreams, ignore the irrational moods, ignored the psychosomatic illnesses, finally said you'll be subjected to accidents. And I would say up to and including suicidal ideation. So that's what he said about, the feedback system that dreams offer to us. He spoke about 4 different kinds of dreams. Housekeeping dreams, which are just rearranging the furniture of the day's activities. And then dreams that come from the personal unconscious, having to do with issues which are important but personal to you. And then dreams, a third group, that come from the collective unconscious. And so in some senses, you're a shaman. You're dreaming on behalf of the tribe when you have these deep, deep dreams. And then he said there's a special category of dreams which are precognitive, or self-diagnostic, or healing dreams. And he differentiated between 2 different kinds of symbolism if you choose to work with your dreams: associative symbolism and archetypal symbolism. So you're the best person to work with associative symbolism. If you dream of a house, let's say the house you grew up in as a kid, so you have associations of that house that other people don't have. You have unique associations. So if you dream of your house, your childhood home, it has particular associations, so that when you're interpreting your dream, you're the expert on the associative symbolism. But a house also has archetypal symbolism. It is an archetype of the entire psyche. And so you need some kind of expertise in order to unpack the archetypal symbolism of, say, let's say, a house. For instance, if you dream about the roof of the house, if you look at the dream, it has to do with your intellectual life. If you dream about, the living room where the fireplace is, has to do with your emotional, your heart space. If you're dreaming about the walls, it might be the boundaries you're setting to others. If you're dreaming about the basement, it can be information hidden in your unconscious. And so these are archetypal symbols where you need to learn about it or consult an expert. So briefly, that's what he had to say about dreams, very briefly. I talked about dreams in the Bible then. I gave one example of a dream interpreted by Joseph of the Old Testament for the Pharaoh, who saw 7 fat cows coming out of the Nile, followed by 7 skinny cows coming out of the Nile, and the 7 skinny ones ate the 7 fat ones. And Joseph interpreted that for him as evidence that there was going to be 7 years of plenty with great harvests, followed by 7 years of famine. So in the Old Testament, that was the great dreamer. Joseph, the husband of Mary, in the New Testament, as I said, God only spoke to him through dreams. And for Mary, her dream vision was of Gabriel, inviting her to become the mother of the Mashiach. And I've just read for you the dream that Peter had, which radically changed the course of the Jesus movement from being a small, insignificant sect of Judaism to becoming a spirituality for the planet, in spite of what happened to it subsequently. But that was the beginning of it. And so dreams are hugely important in the Bible. In fact, in some senses, dreams are the normal way in which God makes contact with human beings in the scriptures. I talked about my own ideas of the personal and the collective unconscious. So for me, the personal unconscious is material generated from daily living in this current incarnation. So when I'm dreaming about personal issues, I'm dreaming about material which is being generated, by me and my relationships in the course of daily living during this particular incarnation. But the collective unconscious is much, much greater than that. The collective unconscious is all of the kind of stored, the archived material of all sentient beings who've ever lived in any dimension, whether we're talking about beings on other planets or extraterrestrials or angelic entities, that wherever there has been sentience, there have been, dreams created, and the collective unconscious is the repository of all of those data. It's a little bit like the modern notion of the cloud. As we're celebrating this Eucharist together, you're uploading your image so the rest of us can see you. And you're downloading our images so you can see the rest of us. So in some senses, that's a little bit like the Akashic records, the ability to participate in the reality of others. Now, I gave my opinion that each of us can experience any event of any other soul who are at the same level of enlightenment as us, or a lesser level. We cannot experience, the events in the lives of people who are much more advanced than we, for a very simple reason. It's not because it's prejudicial or there's a hands-off or there's a boundary sign. Imagine a 2nd grade kid who's studying mathematics, and he goes into a library and he checks out a book which is meant for postgraduate students who are doing PhDs in mathematics. There's no way he can make sense of the book. It's not that he doesn't have access to it. He has access to it, but he's no interest in it because it doesn't make sense to him. And so whatever level we're at in our spiritual evolution, we can't access, the events and the learnings of those who are way beyond us experientially, because we're not resonating at a frequency that allows us to make any kind of sense of the data being presented. But we have access to everything else at our own level, our lesser levels. Now, we can admire those people and we can strive to become like them so that eventually we can read the PhD math book and make sense of that as well. But for the main part, they're beyond most of us. I talked about parallel lives and how they intersect with our dreams. And it is my belief system that we can experience not just past lives, but even future lives and parallel lives. Because the reality is, in the dream state, there is no such thing as time or space. We move in our dreams. I've told you many times about a dream I had of my grandfather, Daddy Jim, who lived in Ireland and died in 1956. And a few years ago, I had a dream where I traveled 6,000 miles to the east and 56 years back in time and was present with him. So there is no time and there is no space when you're in the dream state. So future dreams, past dreams, and parallel dreams are all available. We know from quantum mechanics that it is the observer that collapses the wave of all possibility down to the specific income. In fact, when you study elementary physics, the subatomic particles, they're in what's called superposition. They occupy every place. And the Heisenberg uncertainty principle tells us you can't simultaneously know the location and the momentum of a subatomic particle. You have to freeze one in order to discover the other. So that's what happens to us in our dream states. We have to freeze it into time, a future time or a past time or a parallel time in order to make sense of it, but it's always all available to us. So as holographic fractals of source, as individual souls, we can set up opportunities where we can play and experience the roles of historical characters or even contemporary figures. How many different actors over the course of the last 400 years have played the role of Hamlet in Shakespeare's great drama? Probably tens of thousands of people have had a shot at playing this role. In that sense, you can play the role of any historical character or any contemporary person if you choose to go into a parallel life and inhabit their spacesuit and see what kind of a fist you'd make out of their circumstances. So that's what I mean by parallel lives, and they intersect in our dream space. I talked about dreams as a place where it is typical for the deceased to encounter us, for the simple reason that their vibration is so much higher than ours that they have to come down several levels, and we have to elevate several levels in order to meet them someplace in the middle. And I created the analogy or the metaphor of, if I'm invited by a friend who's visiting from out of state to meet him in a hotel in Palo Alto, and he tells me he has a room on the 5th floor, and I get parking, which is 3 or 4 levels underground. In order to meet him in the lobby for a meal, I've got to go up 3 or 4 levels, and he's got to come down 3 or 4 levels so we can encounter each other. And that's how it happens, that the deceased have to lower their vibration and we have to raise ours. And the simplest way of raising your vibration is through having a vision or looking at your dreams. And I believe, in fact, that these kinds of dreams where we encounter the deceased may well have been a major influence in the origin of religions and a belief in the afterlife. So I covered all that material 2 weeks ago. Then last week, I had a look at lucid dreaming. And lucid dreaming, as I said, is you're dreaming at night and you become aware while you're dreaming that you are dreaming. And because there's no time and no space, gravity does not exist there. So you've got capabilities in a lucid dream that you don't have in the spacesuit. Now, in order to understand the possibilities of lucid dreaming and what you can achieve in it, you have to realize that your culture creates your belief system. If you were born in a different culture, you'd have a different belief system. But you were born into a particular culture, and therefore you have a particular set of beliefs. These beliefs then create your expectations of life and what's possible. And these expectations completely limit your experiences. You can't experience that which you do not believe is real. So your experiences actually determine your reality. Now, in lucid dreaming, you have an opportunity of breaking through these limiting belief systems because there is no time and there is no space. And so it becomes really, really important. Here are the possibilities that you can achieve in lucid dreaming. So how do you prepare if you want to take lucid dreaming seriously? The first one, obviously, is you have to start recording your dreams and working with them in waking consciousness subsequently. So you're developing a deeper relationship with your own unconscious, or maybe even the collective unconscious of all sentient beings. The second thing is a trick where during the course of the day, I ask myself many, many times during the day, am I dreaming right now? And for me, the answer always is, yes, you're dreaming right now. And the next question is, what level of the dream am I on? And for mostly, I say I'm in the level of the dream, which is non-REM waking consciousness. So if I push my hand against the wall, I can't go through the wall. But I keep asking myself during the day, am I dreaming now? And if I'm dreaming, what level of the dream am I in? And so it's a way of checking with yourself so that when you're dreaming at night and you ask yourself that question, you come up with a different answer. Yes, I'm dreaming, and I'm lucid while I'm dreaming. And you can begin to identify signs within the dream that alert you to the fact that this actually is a dream. And there are two levels. There are strong signs and weaker signs. A strong sign is you're in a dream and you find yourself flying. That's you can't fly without an airplane on this physical spacesuit. So if you realize you're flying and you say to yourself, am I dreaming? I have to be dreaming because I'm flying. Now you're lucid, and now you can begin to work with the lucidity. The second class of, they're weaker signs, but there are still triggers that can tell you, yes, you're dreaming. So for instance, you meet a celebrity. I mean, there's a possibility you could actually meet this person, but it's very unlikely. Or you find a whole cache of gold on the sidewalk. Now, that's possible, but very unlikely. So if you're dreaming and you meet a celebrity or find a cache of gold, and you say to yourself, wow, I wonder if I'm dreaming. I probably am, because I don't really know this person. And then you realize, oh, I'm dreaming and I'm lucid, and now I can work with it. So that's kind of the preparation. The final one I mentioned was that the notion of sleep interruption, that if you were to set your alarm clock and give yourself 4 hours of sleep, wake yourself up intentionally, spend a half hour reading or writing or meditating, and then go back to sleep, that there's a much, much greater chance that you'll have lucid dreams subsequently. So that's about like preparation. What are some of the kind of the benefits, or the applications of lucid dreaming? The first one is it's an extraordinary way of reducing anxiety. About 60% of our dreams are anxiety dreams. But people who learn how to dream lucidly over a 3-year period can reduce that percentage from 60% of your dreams down to 1% of your dreams. Because in that state, you can resolve conflicts. It's totally safe. You can engage with people with whom you're having difficulties in waking consciousness. You can have dialogues with their astral beings, and you can resolve a whole bunch of stuff. So a lot of the things that are creating anxiety, you can actually resolve in the dream state when you're lucid. And also it's a place of great creativity. I would say 90% of my ideas or my writing come from working with my dreams, particularly in that liminal space between being fully in the dream, and fully awake, that space in between, working with that space. Then there are kind of, they're like special applications of a lucid dreaming. One of them is the ability to have a kind of precognitive dreams, where you see the data earlier and more clearly, and you see more of the data. And I use the example, for instance, of it's like a submarine. The bulk of the submarine is underwater, the unconscious, that's the power of the system. But occasionally it'll send up a periscope and it'll examine what's above the surface. So you're getting data, which is important for the pilot below to understand. So precognition becomes very possible. Like Joseph's dream about the 7 fat cows and the 7 skinny cows that allowed them to prepare for the famine times. And then the second possibility is telepathy, that you begin to develop telepathy. I said to you last week that Freud, of all people, said at one stage, the original method of communication was lost during phylogenetic development. He was talking about telepathy and claiming that telepathy was the normal way in which we communicated until, the phylogenetic development. It meant the evolution of the species, suppressed telepathy in favor of other forms. And I told you years and years and years ago, as I was trying to unpack the notion of the Tower of Babel, where God allegedly confused our tongues, my interpretation was, it's not that God confused our tongues, it's that we gave up telepathy in favor of linguistics. And the more we depended upon language skills, the less and less our gifts of telepathy. They dissolved. Like a lot of modern kids can't spell and can't do math. because there are spell checks and there are calculators. So we've lost the ability to do simple addition and to spell check. And telepathy went the same way. It seems to me that originally we were much more telepathic. And we see that in our animals. Animals are much more telepathic than we. And finally, then I talked about, dream yoga, a Buddhist practice, a very ancient practice going back 2,500 years, in which you're attempting spiritual transformation by getting deeper and deeper insights into the nature of consciousness and realizing, when you do that, consciousness doesn't end with the death of the brain any more than, the Tokyo, your television didn't create the Tokyo Olympics. And if your television broke down, to believe that the Tokyo Olympics didn't happen. So the brain is simply a transmitter of electromagnetic energies, a transmitter receiver. It doesn't create consciousness. And we realize that with dream yoga. It allows us to finally answer the question, is there such a thing as the separate self? And the answer ultimately is no, there is no such thing as the separate self. Separate self does not exist. But in incarnation, we need a sense of separate self in order to navigate in the physical world. But ultimately, when we go back to source, there's a total dissolution of the separate self. And the Buddha taught that with the doctrine of anatma, no self. And Confucius, a contemporary of his, said that the self is an illusion created by the sum of our social roles. And so this notion that there is a separate self, it's only separate, and the sense of separate self is important only for incarnational purposes until we merge back with source. And so finally, I suggested that there are 4 great stages to the spiritual life. The first stage is dreaming at every level. The second stage is dreaming lucidly, to taking control of our dream life and experimenting with it and pushing it in particular directions. When we've mastered that, the third phase is learning to live lucidly, living in the ultimate realization that there is only God and there is only love. And then finally, having the ability to die lucidly, to shuffle off this mortal coil, to drop the body and just, go into the next room or move through the veil. At that stage, when we've reached that place, we have 2 choices, 2 final choices. I can choose to merge completely with source, as a wave does when it retraces a step from the beach and goes back into the ocean. Or I can choose to take a bodhisattva vow, which is an agreement to keep incarnating until, all of us awaken. So that's where I went with the last 2 Sundays. So open up now for Q&A.
My question was last week, you also just now spoke of the dream yoga and the greater awareness through dreams and bringing that into daily life. I learned dream work from Jeremy Taylor, who would ask the question, for every dream, where is the divine in the dream?
Beautiful.
And for me, what that did was I came to learn that I live in the divine and the divine lives in me. And there's no line that you have to step over. It just is. Now, my question is, I know that being in nature is something that has huge spiritual value for you. Do you feel, is there a difference? And if there is, what is the difference between the dream work experience and the contemplation in nature?
Correct. That's a great question, Teresa. And the truth is that the only difference is in the experiencer. That, when you reach a place where you can find God as easily in an oak tree, or a stream, as you can find God in meditation or in liturgy, there is no difference between them. Because one of the things I say to myself, one of the last things every night, it's like a mantra that I put myself to sleep with. I say, there is only God, there is only love. Ultimately, they're the only reality. And then so you can collapse them because God is love. So there is only God, there is only love. So I keep saying that everything that exists is a word of God made flesh. So God, articulates herself in a variety of ways. Now, the differences between them are that they're the level of self-awareness. So a rock is an expression of God. A rock is a word of God made flesh. But the level of self-awareness of a rock is very different from the level of self-awareness of a puppy dog. And the self-awareness of a puppy dog is different from that of a human being. So it's only a question of how much self-awareness resides in any particular manifestation. And when we get to a certain stage, we can begin to identify God in every place. There is no place where God is not. So in some senses, it doesn't matter where you search. You know, I keep saying as well that it is not important where you look, only how you look. If you don't know how to look, you can look everywhere and find nothing. If you do know how to look, it doesn't matter where you look, you'll find everything. And so it's actually this, I don't say the mindset, it's the soul set with which you make your observations. And for the soul which is resting in God, every place you look is God's handiwork. So ultimately there isn't a difference. The different practices, you know, may be fun, but ultimately, if you know how to do any practice, whether you're walking in nature, or you're writing, or you're dreaming, or meditating, they're all different brushes that in which you're creating a portrait of the divine.
My question has to do with this notion of visions and dreams,
Yes.
and that dreams are when we're asleep and visions are when we're awake. And it's kind of two parts. One has to do with whether there's a kind of liminal space in visions, and that kind of slipping into a daydream. And are there ways to enhance that, ways to be in your life that are like that? I know for myself that one of the clues that when I'm lying in bed at night, getting ready to go to sleep, that I start to have really kind of interesting, impossible visions in a way. And so that's when I know it just clicks in for me. Oh, I'm about to fall asleep because it's this hypnagogic state is going on. So I don't know exactly how to formulate that into a question, but
I hear where you're going, my love. Sure, Pat. And so you're describing perfectly the hypnagogic state, you know, that liminal space when you're falling asleep, in which you're going to have some really, really interesting kinds of activity going on. And then at the other end is called the hypnopompic, when you're coming out of dreams at the end of the night and you're not fully awake. So those two liminal spaces are really, really important. Now, to answer your question more fully, you can create liminal spaces yourself. You're an artist. You know, when you take a brush and a palette and a canvas, you're actually creating a liminal space. You're getting ready to kind of channel, you know, art. The same thing is true for people who do creative writing. The same thing is true for people who go out into nature looking for God rather than just kind of trying to get exercise. And so I much prefer to walk alone in nature than to walk with a companion, because with a companion, there's conversation, and nature will hide itself if there's conversation going on. So when I go really quietly. It may take me 5 hours to cover 2 miles, and I'll always carry a pen and paper with me, and I'll watch what's happening, watching a spider building a web, or watching fish jumping out of the stream, or watching the way that the wind is blowing the leaves on a fir tree. And so you can create liminality by the mindset and the soul set with which you engage in any activity. When you're playing with your grandkids, you can just see yourself as grandma making sure they're safe, or you can see yourself as a fellow soul traveling with these extraordinary creative little creatures and join in their games. You can go with your grandson and find Madagascar, as you've done with him in the past. And so you can actually infuse any activity with luminosity to kind of invent a new word. So it's what you bring to the encounter that creates the liminal space. And literally you can infuse any activity with that liminality. Yes.
So just to make a quick comment, I think that that notion of picking up a paintbrush and channeling something, I had an experience once where I picked up the brush and I was getting ready to start, and I thought, oh, it's not a picture, it's a poem.
Beautiful, beautiful.
And then that's what came.
That's beautiful. So it was God, like God being a child and saying, you know what, I don't want to play with the train set today. I want to go on my tricycle. So you do what God is telling you to do.
Yeah, it's
put on the paintbrush and take up a pen.
It's really interesting how this experience suddenly it's like a dream itself, where Karen's question dovetails with what I'm about to ask, and it's all seemingly connected. But this is this last week, particularly upon your invitation, I've been really paying attention to my dream life, and I can't help realizing that when you invite when you realize that it was a dream and you get up to write it down, you catch the tail end of the dream and you start pulling that string, and it starts taking you farther and noticeably farther now after 5 or 7 days of doing it than normal. And then little pieces of the very beginning of the dream get revealed, and suddenly this more defined form shows up. And it was inevitable to think of this Mexican researcher, Jacobo Greenberg, a very interesting man, that he used to say that reality functions pretty much in the same way, but we are creating it, but we only get the tail end of it, and we get the end result of this construction. So our thoughts and feelings and all of these subconscious material are actually, gelling this experience in the final moment, which is when we receive it. So how I know that you've been talking about this, all throughout, but this connection between the dream and the waking state, and how this tail end moment can be an insight to look into our own contribution to our current reality. So
brilliant observation, Germán, and a great question. It reminds me, as a small child, I grew up in Cork City, and there's a very big river flows through Cork City. It's about maybe 400 or 500 meters wide at the widest part. And watching people who are trying to string a steel cable across the river, the electricity supply board, the ESB, trying to bring power from one side of the city to the other across the river. And all they had was a little rowboat. And there's this big coil of steel hawser. It would have sunk the rowboat if they'd put it into it. So there's no way they could get it across the river in a rowboat. So they came up with a brilliant plan. They got a rope and they attached it to the steel cable. And then they coiled the rope up and put it into the boat. And one guy is rowing the boat across and the other guy is paying out the rope. And they get to the other side and they attach the rope to a tractor. And they pull the rope across and it's attached to the steel cable. And finally, they get the entire cable across. Now, I use this as a metaphor. It's like when you're starting a new enterprise, like dreaming, or maybe a new relationship, you have to start with dental floss. And the dental floss is attached to a piece of string. And the string is attached to a rope, and the rope is attached to the steel cable. But you can't create a new relationship by trying to make it a steel cable to begin with. And you can't get a hold on your dreams by trying to get a steel cable. So what you're saying is actually brilliant. You have to start with a little dental floss, pull on it. It'll deliver the string into your hand eventually, which will deliver the rope into your hand, which will develop the cable. So how do you do that? It's very important if you're interested in remembering your dreams and working with them. When you wake up in the morning and you're still in that liminal space, you're not dreaming exactly and you're not awake exactly, that you become conscious that you're in that space. Don't move your body. Don't move over to the side. Don't attempt to grab a pen and start writing stuff down. Don't open your eyes. Stay totally enclosed in that space and revisit as much of the dream as you can revisit. Pick up as much as you can. And when you think you've got the essence of it, then get up and make some notes for yourself. And then I guarantee you, if you pick up 5 or 6 key phrases or scenes, you'll be able to reconstruct the entire dream. Now you have the dream. Now that's the dental floss. Now you start working with the dream. You start analyzing it, or you start meditating on it, or you start inviting the dream to speak to you in signs during the day, stuff you see in nature, phone calls you receive, whatever. And slowly, you'll find yourself eventually having a steel cable, a real deep connection to areas that, I'm not going to pun, you would never have dreamt of. So that's the trick. Start with the little dental floss, pull on it, you get a string, it'll lead to a rope, and the rope will lead to the cable. And then you'll see the evidence and you see the levels of reality that are hidden from us because our expectations have created our reality. Our cultural belief systems have created, our mindset. And it's almost impossible to experience that which your culture tells you does not exist. But pull on that string and you're breaking out of your culture and all cultures.
Father Seán, first of all, I wanted to thank you for the last 2 Sundays. You have provided me with a years-long curriculum for working on, and then working on mastery, which is going to take me many more years. So I really do thank you for that. You've answered so many questions and more answers to questions I didn't have. But I still have one more question.
Sure, go for it.
That has to do with the relationship of our spirit guides and spirit teachers and our dreams.
Yes.
You had mentioned that you don't create yourself all these dreams. Did they help direct or create? Do they show up in dreams either as themselves or in costume? So I'd like to have your thoughts on that.
That's absolutely right. You're right on, Martha. They do. And so I was, as I said, we think we're the creators of our own dreams. That we create the characters, the plot, the dialogue, the geographical locations, and in some senses we do help to create it. But mostly, particularly the more important dreams, the dreams that you wake from and you realize that I got a really powerful message tonight. It wasn't just a housekeeping dream. It wasn't even just coming from my personal unconscious. This was coming from the collective. This was coming from the Akashic records. And at that stage, you're being fed imagery, and you're being fed dialogue, and you're being fed a plot by these angelic beings or these mentor figures who helped you before you incarnated each time to create the ideal circumstances in which you would learn whatever lessons you've come to learn in this lifetime, whether it's compassion or patience or forgiveness or creativity, whatever it is. They sat with you and you planned out the incarnation, and you came in with a soul group. You made what I've called a preconception contract, in which you were destined to encounter all of the significant people in your life, even if you didn't meet them until you were in your 30s or whatever. That everybody who's going to be important in this incarnation for you, you're going to meet them at some stage, because you're important to them and they're important to you. You're on stage 24/7, and they're kind of playing supplementary roles for you. And each of them is on stage 24/7, and you're playing a subsidiary role for them. So we're helping each other out. And this is being orchestrated and consciously, unconsciously, maybe throughout the course of the day, through deja vu experiences or intuitive experiences or sudden realizations. You get an idea and you wonder, where did that come from? It's being fed to you, by your own higher self, your Atman, and it's being fed to you by your mentor figures. So all great movements and all great insights and all great intuitive flashes are actually being fed to you by your mentors and your angelic beings. So we don't come down here alone. None of us comes down here. We're not born alone. If you could open your eyes in a labor ward and watch a baby coming into the world, you would be shocked to see the host of heavenly beings that are attendant upon this little child's entry. None of us comes in alone, and none of us exits alone. There's an equally extraordinary entourage of mentors and family members who've preceded us. They are welcoming us. We're never alone. We never do anything alone. All great ideas are being fed to us by our higher self or by mentor beings.
You had said that a large percentage of our dreams we remember are anxiety dreams. And since we really don't remember a lot of our dreams anyway, is it possible that for some reason we all just remember anxiety dreams, even though we're having lots of other ones? And why would that be? I mean, am I making any sense?
Yes, it makes sense. And the reason obviously is that the unconscious, is the powerhouse of the psyche. As I said, it's like a submarine. 99.999% of the power of the submarine is underwater. There's only a tiny percentage that's in the periscope. But the periscope offers, an alternative perspective, a conscious perspective. But the unconscious is processing data at the rate of 40 million bits a second. Consciousness is processing data at the rate of 4 bits per second, plus or minus 5 bits. And so its power is totally in excess. And the unconscious is constantly trying to give us an alternative perspective to the issues that we're worried about in real life. And the normal way in which it does it is giving us dreams. And when we work with our dreams, it's like we're listening to a great teacher and saying, you're worried about X. Here's another perspective on X. Here's another approach to X. Here's how you might solve X more efficiently. But we ignore them. And so then, eventually the unconscious tries to get our attention by we wake up with irrational moods. we're totally upset, we're on awakening, or at some stage during the day, and there's no reason why we should be upset. And it's because the unconscious is still trying to get our attention since we didn't listen to the dreams. And we ignore that. We don't know why we're anxious or upset or irrational or moody or whatever. And so the third stage is we develop psychosomatic illnesses. The unconscious is literally using our body to get our attention. And most of us, we'll go to the doctor and we'll pop a pill. And finally, Jung says, you know, if it doesn't get our attention through dreams or through rational moods or through psychosocial or physical, somatic illnesses, we'll start having accidents. And I would say accidents up to and including either suicidal ideation or even suicide itself. And so we can save ourselves a lot of hassle. We can reduce significantly our anxiety if we're listening to our dreams. They're portraying it kind of symbolically, and particularly when we learn to dream lucidly, because in that lucid dream state, we can work with the anxiety. You can change the outcome when you become lucid in a dream. You can kind of dialogue with people who are causing you the difficulties in waking consciousness. You can dialogue with them in the dream state and resolve a lot of the issues there. So you don't have to take it into waking consciousness again.
I heard once that your dreams are either like something that you're afraid of. Your dreams are either something you're afraid of, which is like the anxiety you talked about, something that happened before, or something that will happen. Just if you want to comment on that, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, so absolutely. Because as I said, there is no time and there is no space in dreams. You're outside of time and outside of space. So you can experience past lives in your dream state. You can experience future lives in your dream state, and you can experience parallel lifetimes in your dream state because you're totally outside of time. Time is an artifact created because of incarnation. When we decide to incarnate, we're subject to a whole bunch of limitations. The first thing is we've traded cosmic awareness for this little 3-pound laptop that we carry between our ears, which is totally unable to grok the entire gestalt. And so we have to break up our experiences into bite-sized pieces and process them sequentially. And that gives rise to the notion of time or chronology. But there is no chronology when you step outside of that. And in your dream state, you realize that you are outside of time, outside of space, and the laws of physics do not apply in the dream state. You can fly in the dream state. Causality is totally different. Causality is created in the dream by your thought processes or by the intervention of other entities, benign or malignant, whether they're, discombobulated entities who are traveling around because they're stuck in Earth orbit, or they're, angelic beings who are trying to help you. And so there is no time when you step outside there. So yes, you can be dreaming about the past, or dreaming about the future, or dreaming about the parallel present. Yeah.
This one has to do with the statement of that image of the mycelium, the separate self, and why it's necessary for incarnation. And so I'm wondering about the effects of individuation or self-realization on the whole.
Brilliant. Awesome question, Gary. Awesome question. So if you remember, or for anybody who wasn't here last week or the week before, a mycelium is a single organism, and the largest organism on planet Earth is a mycelium, which undergirders 4 states of the United States. And it shoots up billions of mushrooms. But when they do DNA analysis of these mushrooms in the different states, the DNA is identical. So it's a single organism which is sending up all of these kind of saplings, but they're the same organism. So in some senses, all sentient beings, are manifestations of a divine mycelium, Godhead, or whatever you want to call it. So why would that be? Why would God create the notion, the sense of separate self, if there isn't separate self? Because this is the way in which God experiences. This is kind of getting really into esoteric arenas, because ultimately we can't say anything about the ineffability of God. All we can do is use stories and parables and metaphors, which is what Jesus does and what I try to do. Because we can articulate our experiences of the ineffable, but we cannot, ontologically describe the ineffable. All we can do is to try to create metaphors and parables. And so Hinduism came up with this metaphor that life or existence is a game called Laila, that it is God playing a game. And in my term, I call it God playing hide and go seek with herself, because When you look at the Trinitarian formula, and many great wisdom traditions have a Trinitarian formula. Buddhism does, Judaism does, Hinduism does, Christianity does. So we think about a Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So in some senses, the way I unpack that is God the Father represents isness, all that is. The Son represents God's total self-awareness. And the Spirit represents the love that God has for whom she knows herself to be. But in that Trinitarian formula, there are no experiences possible, because God is all that there is, and God knows all that she is, and God loves all she finds herself to be, but she can't generate experiences. So she has to play this game of self-fracturing. Judaism calls this netzotzim, sparks of the divine. So for me, every soul is a holographic fractal where God has self-fractured in order to generate experiences. In the same way in which bees leave the hive every morning, and travel out and gather stories and nectar from, thousands of different plants, and then bring them back to feed, those at home, and particularly to feed the queen bee right there. So God, in some sense, is the queen bee, but she can't generate experiences except through self-fracturing. And so self-fracturing means the temporary disidentification with who we really are. And who we really are is, there is only God. There is only love, and there is only God. But in order for that to generate experiences, she has to play the game of Layla. And we are the bees that gather the stories and the nectar for God. And to do that, we need to have a sense of separate self. The question is, when we go back to the hive, will we continue to go out the next morning and gather more pollens? Or at some stage, is God going to say, okay, I want to fold up this particular game of Layla, and we have no idea what game she's going to create next. And if God decides to fold it up, there won't be any need even for the Bodhisattva vow. And there certainly won't be any need, to be a separate wave on the ocean. So that's why there's separation.
And could you say something about the effect of the sort of self-realization on the part of the individual?
Okay. So what does self-realization then mean in this context? Self-realization is the gradual accumulating disidentification with lesser and lesser ideas of who I am, until finally I realize that who I am is a fractal of source. So whether you call it salvation in the Christian model, or self-realization in the Hindu model, or enlightenment in the Buddhist model, it goes by very, very different names. But what happens is there's a sequential disidentifying with the things that held us limited. I disidentify with my nationality. I disidentify with my gender. I disidentify with my religion. I disidentify with my spacesuit. I disidentify with my relationships. I disidentify with my profession. I disidentify with my religious affiliation. One by one, I shed all of these, which doesn't mean I'm going to continue to inhabit them during incarnation, but I'm inhabiting them from a realization of who I really am, that I'm playing this particular part. And then the penultimate stage is I have disidentified with everything except my soul. And finally, I disidentify even with that. So I've said to you many, many times that life is a dream that the ego is having. And the ego is a dream that the soul is having. And soul is a dream that spirit is having. And spirit is a dream that source is having. So these are all the gradual disidentifications. And the penultimate disidentification is the identification with soul. But that, even that is not who you are. And so we can come to that realization while we're incarnated. Jesus did, the great avatars did. So they continued to fulfill their mission. There's two great phrases in Buddhism that differentiate between Turiya and Turiyatita. Turiya is the witnessing consciousness, or what we might call the soul self. And Turiyatita is the ability to walk on two legs, to disidentify with incarnation, but to fulfill my incarnational mission to the fullness of my being. So I don't identify with it, but I fulfill it as a mission that I signed up for. And they call that Turiyatita. So I'm identified with my soul. I'm not identified with my body or my relationships or my mind or my personality. I'm identified with my soul self, but I'm playing as best I can my role self. And so in many, many systems, finally, the final misidentification is that I am a soul, a separate soul from God. And that finally ends. And it's not like I have impoverished myself. In deciding to no longer be a wave, but to go back to the ocean, my essence now is the strength of the ocean, not just the insignificant power of a single wave on a strand.
Do you have any advice on how to start dreaming lucidly? I've been at the point, I've had one lucid dream, and that was kind of by accident, and where I was driving a car that I had in real life taken the engine out of the day before, and I realized that. But I've been at the point where I have a suspicion that it's a dream, but I'm not really sure. So I look at myself in the mirror and I see myself in the dream, or, I try to fly and nothing happens, or I put my hand on a wall and there's a wall there. And I was wondering if you have some advice on how to test to figure out whether it's a dream or not.
Okay.
That would be.
So the first advice I would give to you, Jonathan, there's some really, really good literature out there. And
Okay.
in fact, if you drop me an email during the week, I'll try and create a bibliography, or indeed anybody. I will try to create a bibliography of good texts on lucid dreaming. But just for the moment, the first thing is you have to start collecting your dreams on a regular basis. Writing them down. The second thing is you have to start working with the stuff that you're writing down, because you're going to develop themes. Themes tend to repeat throughout dreams. So sometimes working with an individual dream, you won't see the full impact of it, because you have a similar dream in 3 weeks' time and it's developing the theme. But over a long period of time, it'll be obvious what the themes are. So firstly, write your dreams down. Secondly, work with them. Thirdly, ask yourself regularly during the day, am I dreaming now? Make those tests, putting your hand against the wall or whatever. And then I guarantee you, it's like any important relationship. The more energy you put into developing a relationship, the more the other party is going to show up at the other side. And so the unconscious has been so badly ignored by us humans. The shamanistic cultures, and mystics, have been plugged into this area, forever. But the rest of us are unplugged from it. So we have to plug ourselves back in and make a commitment to honoring the relationship. And I guarantee you, with some helpful tips that you're going to pick up from this bibliography, you'll find a way to dream lucidly. Now, even great lucid dreamers, they will be lucky if they have, 2 or 3 lucid dreams a month. It's not that you can just turn it on and do it every night. Almost nobody can do that. But if you can, on a regular basis, 2 or 3 times a month, have lucid dreams, you will reap huge, huge harvests from that. So send me an email. I'll send you a bibliography. And just for the meantime, start recording them and start working with them.
I pretty much remember almost every dream I've had since I was about 6. So I definitely see a theme, when a dream shows up from 1 year or 2 years ago. I can remember that when I wake up.
With that kind of extraordinary memory, can you now kind of extract the meaning or the teaching of the themes particularly? And so it's like you have the data. Now the question is, can you determine what the algorithm hidden in the data might be?
You spoke about us being fractals, right? But then you also talk about Gaia at different times in the past, about having her own trajectory as a heavenly incarnated spiritual soul being. Can you kind of talk to them, because we've got all of these things going on the planet, humans, life, animals, plant life forms, and then the big rock factor.
Yes, absolutely.
So, thanks.
And so I think I shared with you many times a powerful vision I had many years ago, where there were great souls, what Hinduism would call Mahatma, standing in front of God and volunteering for incarnational mission. And this particular soul that I call Gaia or Pachamama volunteered to animate the 3rd rock from the sun in our solar system and to breed life, until she managed to throw up a life form which would be aware of its own inner divinity and ipso facto, be able to identify the divinity of all other forms. And she spent 3.7 billion years in that exercise. And somewhere in the last 70,000 years, she managed to throw up a species. Now, in actual fact, she may have done this in the past. She may have done this cyclically and we destroyed ourselves and she tried it again. But at the moment, we're at a stage of this experiment where we're beginning to understand our own divinity. At least the mystics are doing it. You know, they understand this. Obviously, most of the rest of us don't. You know, we're simply engineers plundering the planet for resources. So we're not realizing that Gaia is an extraordinarily advanced soul who's capable of breeding life forms that themselves become aware of their own divinity. Now she's thrown up lots of other life forms, and there's an entire spectrum of self-awareness, you know, available. Rocks, you know, are obviously responding to environmental issues, to rain or snow or wind or whatever, but it's almost like that's a pre-programmed response. That's the difference between the evolution of consciousness and what happens with Homo sapiens sapiens, which is conscious evolution. We are now in a position to determine the further evolution of the planet. Now, in the meantime, nature, through other channels, because we're just one channel of nature, nature continues to evolve as well, through astronomical events, meteor showers, or, you know, comets, you know, or and geological events like earthquakes or hurricanes or whatever. She's continuing to change the environment for her own reasons. But we are creating problems that the world hasn't seen before. And so until we wake up and realize that we are partners in this dance with Pachamama and all of the other characters in this dream she's having, every single life form on the planet is a character in the dream that Pachamama is having. And we have to interface with them in a way that honors their inner divinity. Even if they're not consciously aware of their divinity, they're moving through it from that space. And we who are consciously aware of our divinity have used that, you know, to bludgeon the rest of nature. So we have to wake up from the state of the dream in which we see ourselves as the masters of our own destiny. We're not. We're like sailors on the ocean. The oceans will determine, you know, the size of the waves, you know, and whether there'll be tsunamis. The sailor determines where he's going to kind of head the boat. He's going to face into the storm or try to get for shore. So we have some say-so. It's a little bit, and we need to use that say-so in a way that's totally cognizant of the divinity of all of the life forms and make this a dream and a drama in which all of the participants are honored for their contributions.
I do tend to lucid dream. I want to say that for the past year or so, I've been, something weird has been happening to me where I'm afraid I'm afraid that I can't get out of the lucid dream.
Gotcha.
And it's been kind of bothering me a little bit.
Yes.
So, because I feel it's hampering me to not have the lucid dreams anymore. And but when I'm in the lucid dream, I'm like, I get kind of freaked out, and I have to get. What if I can't? I say to myself, what if I can't get out of this lucid dream? And I'm just wondering, you know, if you have anything to say about that.
Yeah, two responses to that, Deborah. And firstly, you're really lucky that you have that facility. It's an extraordinary facility. And I hope you continue to develop it, because you can be a prophetess, not just for your family, but for all of us as well. So a very simple thing, obviously, is to kind of set an alarm clock at some stage so that you're woken by an external sound source, so you're not going to get stuck. But I guarantee you that the fear of not being able to get out of the lucid dream is an invitation to finally overcome the ego, even as it kind of filters into the dream state. Because part of the great spiritual journey is ego death, which doesn't mean that you don't have an ego anymore. It just means that your ego knows that it's the servant of the soul. It is not the master of your destiny. And so in the spiritual journey, at some stage, at some incarnation, every one of us is going to encounter circumstances which look like death, look like they were going to either get stuck or get annihilated. You know, I'm just reading a fascinating book at the moment about a philosophy professor who spent 20 years doing LSD on his own and mapping what his journey was. And he's now published a book doing it and talking precisely about this phenomenon of encountering ego death, which is absolutely scary. But it's the dismantling of the defense mechanisms that force us to identify, you know, with an ego, which is simply the CEO of waking consciousness. But the ego wants to believe that it's the center of the psyche, which it's not. The soul is the center of the psyche. In fact, the word psyche is simply the Greek word for soul. And so if you have the courage to stay with the process, what's going to happen is you're going to finally be able to disidentify with your ego and just use your ego subsequently to maneuver in waking consciousness. And you need an ego for that, but you're not going to identify with the ego anymore. And you will see extraordinary, huge changes in relationships, not just personal relationships, but your relationships to the world and to your ability to impact the future of the planet itself.